Hey, hello, leavers and believers. Welcome to Leaving Hillsong, and welcome back if you're a regular. My name's Tanya, and today we are going to continue with a bit of a tyrant, part 2. And I think it's one of the most important and interesting conversations that we have around this topic of getting away from evangelical churches and what happens after is the way people look back and wonder how they were involved in a system at different levels and how they wind up kind of doing things they never realized they were doing. Last we left Dave, he had been a youth pastor, he had graduated Bible college at Hillsong, and he was full of ambition and energy and enthusiasm for the vision. And then things kind of didn't work out, and he had a hospital admission and found himself smoking cigarettes with Joey out the back, which is not how he'd imagined his life to go. But Dave got out of that situation, and it's a really cool story. So I hope you really enjoy it. We're doing some difficult stuff, and yeah, I'm excited. Had a really interesting conversation with a man this week about the systems that form under perpetrators, systems of enablers, and how they all work together, and it's fascinating stuff, and I'm dragging him on the show. So let's find out what it's like to feel those feelings with Dave in A Bit of a Tyrant, part 2.
I think, yeah, the faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen, right? Like you don't need medication to to achieve like what God's got for you or whatever. It just didn't seem like, it seemed like cheating, right? Or it seemed like there was something wrong with me. And so, yeah, I took medication, and it turned out, it depends how many of the listeners here probably know about what mental health treatment is like. It's a bit like roulette. Like you give people medication, you hope for the best, and you monitor, right? And so for me, I was like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm taking medication. I also didn't react that well to the medication, and I can't really remember what happened, but I woke up in a mental health unit at hospital a little while later, and it turns out, yeah, I sort of had tried to take my own life. I had a whole plan. I had kind of, when I'd been admitted, I explained to the nurse or whatever what I was going to do, and I kind of can't really remember much of this stuff, and it's super hazy, but it was so weird to go from doing all of this stuff and having so much involvement in church and having my life on a track to suddenly being in this situation where it all had disappeared.
So sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
And,
I
and
don't really
so
remember
extreme.
it.
Hey, well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously hugely traumatic and hugely extreme, and not an uncommon burnout kind of thing. Hey.
Oh, well, obviously years later, I realized it happens to a lot of people. But back then, I really thought I was by myself. And I've got to give massive credit to some of my friends at the time were so invested in my life, especially my friend. I used to work at this sneaker shop called Vans on George Street, like we sold Vans shoes. And my friends at the sneaker shop obviously didn't go to church, didn't really have much to do with it, and thought the whole thing was super weird. But they were so worried about me and so checking in. And I also had some really, really close friends in church, including the girl I was dating at the time, that, you know, showed up to hospital. Really, the glimpses of memory that I have of the hospital, it was not a fun place. And from the stories I hear back about what it was like inside, I realize it must have been very confronting and traumatic for people to want to come and visit me in that place, but they did. And so it was really, really cool to have that support, but it helped me with the reset that I needed to figure out what to do next, if that makes sense. Yeah, so the doctor diagnosed me as being suffering from bipolar. I got different medication. I think I went through 5 different types of medication, morning ones, evening ones, all of the ones. By the way, it's all quite expensive when you have to pay for it as well. But anyway, so, you know, for probably a couple of years after that, I guess I was doing different sort of mixes of medication until the point where I was able to find a psychiatrist. And this, again, my partner helped me do this. She found me a psychiatrist that was very expensive, but helped give me the time that I needed to wean off the medication. And she was strongly of the opinion that the diagnosis was probably wrong.
I mean, what did you make of the diagnosis, and what do you think now?
I don't know. I think that, yeah, obviously there's chemical issues going on. Everyone has balances and imbalances. It life's, you know, dynamic like that. But I don't necessarily believe I had a chronic, because if you know much about bipolar, you know that it's possibly not easy to cure or possibly incurable. However, I have been without medication for good 7 or 8 years, so just put two and two together, right?
Do you think it was environmental at all that led to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, there's a lot of people that come out of these places with mental health diagnoses that weren't there before or have been exacerbated, or
you put two and two together. We're on a podcast called Leaving Hillsong, and after I left Hillsong, I seem to be doing okay. So, I think for me, it's plain as day. I think the environment that I was in, the advice that I was getting from people at church and my leaders at church and the people that I sort of trusted and believed in was like, be in this environment, stay in this environment, stay the path, all the sayings. And what I was sort of knowing inside to be true and getting from sort of outside world was, maybe change your environment, maybe look after yourself a little bit more, don't push yourself so hard, find a job that actually pays money properly, find, a routine that suits you. And sure enough, years later, I am in a job that I love, in a marriage that is awesome, that I love, surrounded by people that I love. And I feel extremely lucky to have found a way out. So, yeah.
Like that's an extreme process to go through, to have to accept a label, manage all of those things and pay for the medications and all those adaptations, and then undo that. That's huge. And you bring up support repeatedly. So that's obviously very key, is supportive people. They don't have to, be from a certain place or,
Yeah, maybe I'm the only stupid one that didn't realize this, but you see people like a pastor get up on stage to talk about how you should live and talk about what God's saying for your life or whatever. And the last thing I'm thinking of is, who does this person ask for help from, and who does this person go to for support, and what are the processes and the systems in place that help this person stay healthy? And you're not thinking about that. You're thinking about, wow, this guy is so invested in studying the Bible and spending time with God and whatever that looks like. He's so, anointed. We use that word a lot. It's Christianese for, what would you say anointed means? I guess it means picked or chosen or set apart, right?
Yeah.
This person is so sort of set apart that I want to be like that. How do I do that? And so I think in my mind, I was kind of pursuing that path and just didn't realize and see the signs that, I've got to look after myself. I've got to listen to, what my body and my soul needs, and kind of find the right people to feed those things. And so, just really, I guess, again, I've got to keep saying that I feel super lucky for finding my way out of it. And again, there are great people. And I know you've said many, many times, so I listen to this podcast. I'm a proud Patreon supporter. I listen to this podcast all the time. And so I hear many times there are great people, good people involved in churches. There are. And at the same time, there are many people who sort of close their minds off and close their eyes to the warning signs and just keep, giving of their time and their money and just to a point where I don't believe it's healthy.
And why is that? I mean, you're so clear and you're so articulate about, these two kind of, not different personalities, but these two feelings inside you, this conflict. What makes you persist? What makes people persist, do you think? I mean, it's obviously complex, but how do we explain that is all I'm saying. Like, you felt these things from early on, and yet, and you see people persist in this in spite of the most, all kinds of.
I don't know, but for me, it was, a lot of our, what I mean when I say altar calls, if anyone sort of doesn't understand that, is in a church like Hillsong and similar, you have this passionate sort of preacher giving a message and saying, hey, God's message for you today is surrender X, Y, Z, or do this or do that. And so, hey, the message wraps up. There's someone on the keyboards playing music and the atmosphere is all super reflective. And they say, if that message really spoke to you and in your heart, that this applies to you, why don't you put up your hand and why don't you come down the front and to this altar call? And that's what I mean when I say altar call, to, do business with God, quote unquote, or, give your worries and your cares over to God or whatever it is. And so I think many of those altar calls would be around the theme of give everything, give it all, just like Jesus broke that box of really expensive perfume at the feet of that woman and give absolutely everything you have, because that's the only way to have an authentic, true relationship with God. And when you're, I want to say hypnotized almost with that message from a young age, over and over and over and over. And you're just like, hey, the answer to my problems is give everything to God. The answer to the issues with my girlfriend or partner, give it all to God. The issues with money or the issues with my job or my parents, whatever it is, give it all to God. And you sort of just do it without even thinking. And it's like, this is easy. Hillsong runs 5 services a Sunday. It runs all of these connect groups and all this stuff. You can be there every day if you want. So easy option, jump in, like all in, give it all to God. And I think that was where my ability to, see the shades of gray and see what I needed and look after myself just went out the window, if that makes sense.
Absolute sense. And that is where the hypnosis begins, at that altar call.
Yeah.
You were persisting and suppressing and going along and doing your very best
Yes.
to do the right thing.
Yeah.
At what point does it become like too much?
Yeah, so I think being in hospital was interesting for me. It's something that's really actually quite funny about this, and I cringe about it now, but I'll just tell you. So while I was in hospital, I made friends with this guy. I think his name was Joey. I can't quite remember. But anyway, we were both just, because if you've ever been in a mental health unit, hopefully not many of you have, it's a little bit like prison, where you are allowed outside for certain amounts of time. You are allowed to kind of socialize, and then you have to go to your room at certain times, and you get outside visits, but only with supervision. So, if like me, you were at risk of doing yourself harm or doing others harm, you had to be supervised all the time, right? And so Joey and I just kept each other company because it was so lonely in there. And he was a chronic pack-a-day smoker. And so he got me hooked on cigarettes. And I remember, which is so funny, because, there you go, from one side being on stage at church or doing whatever, telling people how to give their tithes and offerings, to literally punching durries. And
with Joey out the back of the truck, sweet out.
Which is so. I just remember one of my pastors came to visit me in hospital, and he was like, "Dave, these aren't good for you." And I'm like, "Oh no, yeah." But anyway, so it was funny because that was like, I came out of hospital literally addicted to smoking, and I'd sort of sit out in the backyard or whatever, having my cigarette at the day to try and wean myself off it, and just thinking to myself, like, this is so weird. Like, on one hand, my whole life was going in this direction, and on the other hand, here I am now, like, just the picture of this washed up, burnt out sort of person smoking literal cigarettes.
Did you ever have a cigarette and pray? Because I used to be like, I'm so sorry, God, like,
this is so funny. Yeah, I never talk about this to anyone, but ironically now everyone knows. Yeah, I think the irony was not lost on me. I just sat there kind of trying not to be too introspective, because I was like, this is so weird that life could not get weirder. You couldn't even make this stuff up. But yeah, in terms of leaving, I just sort of thought to myself, like, okay, I need to make some serious decisions. And another part of this was my dad had gotten very sick, and my dad and I went super close, but I realized there was a gap in our relationship where I'd filled it with church for the past decade or so, and I really needed to reconnect with him. And so I realized that I'd left my parents high and dry for a long time and sort of just ignored them while I was pursuing all of these dreams of being a pastor and all of this stuff. And so it just really helped me remember what else was in my life before church and before God, and so it just helped me start to disconnect slowly. I think we talk now in the year 2022 about this phenomenon of quiet quitters, where people are quitting their jobs really slowly. Like, they'll drop down to 2 or 3 days a week instead of full time, or they'll scale back their involvement for less money, but it means that their quality of work-life balance is better. And I think I was kind of doing the same thing. So I slowly sort of extracted myself from my job at Youth Alive, which is kind of funny, like working at Hills campus when you need to jump out the back for a smoke. It's just not really a thing. So yeah, I got out of that and sort of slowly but surely extracted myself from all of my roles and bits and pieces. In the meantime, my partner, who was incredibly supportive, and I got married, which is super cool. And so we had each other, and we also discovered that we felt the same way about a lot of things, which was such a cool thing. And I'm really grateful for that. But it obviously
have one of those scary conversations, like,
absolutely. Well, cool. We'd broken up because I thought I couldn't take her where I was going, right? I thought that I thought that she just wanted to marry a pastor, wanted to be a pastor's wife, wanted all of this stuff. And I just thought, she's not going to get it from me. This is terrible. I've got to let her down easy. And actually what happened was we realized we felt the same way about everything, and we were able to Yeah, it was super cool. Again, I feel so lucky. Like, I can't even tell you.
So
So
that's amazing. Again, the connection. Again,
yeah,
you know what I mean? The isolation, the censorship, the separation, even between two people in a relationship. And when that's broken down,
yeah,
it's, it's like a dam and the floods just
yeah,
come and the rest is history kind of thing, because people connect and they do the right thing. They do, people
yeah.
aren't without conscience
Yes,
because they're not in a church environment. And,
yes.
if they do get together and compare notes, like it can
Yeah.
be just so wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
we should.
great.
So to need to do a whole other podcast on that, because that was, yeah, being honest has led me down the right path every single time with this stuff. So, just it was so, so good. And then we kind of, I'm not going to say we made a plan, but it was kind of like there were things that we started to notice when we both were on the same page, and I'd started to make a firm decision like, okay, this is not where I want my life to go. I started seeing the things that I wouldn't let myself see before, and started seeing the way people were treated. Or there again, I've got to remind you and myself that there are many great people involved in that organization, and at the same time, I believe there are people there that are very manipulative and very controlling and very concerned with making sure the numbers and making sure that their output is at a certain level, and sort of that's the master metric, right? Not necessarily people. And so we just realized this isn't a healthy place for us. It's not good for me, it's not good for us, and we decided to leave. But we were also very quiet about it. We chose not to make all this fanfare. And I guess talking to you now is my way of just being able to apologize to the people that I was, rough to and was a horrible leader to. And I remember this one poor girl at youth group once. She was, a youth leader doing the best that she could. And I remember telling her how she wasn't doing a good enough job, and she was crying. And I was like, how are you crying? You've got to be stronger than that. And now I look back on that stuff and I think that is like, who the heck did I think I was? Like, it is not okay to do that to people, especially if they're volunteering and trying their best. Things like that I just think about. And that's probably the worst part of it, is just the shame that comes from, feeling like at the time I was such a great leader, and realizing now that I was a joke. It was terrible. And the things that I was building were not sustainable. The things I was doing to people weren't cool, and it wasn't biblical. It wasn't, and so
That's just huge. That is huge. That is so honest and brave of you. And I'm not being cliche. I think there's so many thousands of people wrestling with these very feelings. I really do. And I think it keeps people silent and full of shame. And I just hope that people can listen to what you're saying and follow some of that, and just what do you recommend? Like reaching. So I mean, I guess from both sides of things, that girl you made cry, I mean, should she reach out and say, listen, that wasn't okay? Or is it up to you to find people? Or how do people kind of, what might people do? Because you keep talking about connections, honesty, having conversations. What can people do to right these wrongs? Or
I don't know, Tanya. I think a big turning point for me, I've told you this many times, was reading your book, People in Glass Houses, which I only actually read probably a year ago or so. I think when we first started chatting, when Leaving Hillsong became a thing, and I sort of saw that pop up on my Instagram and messaged you straight away. I was like, who is this? This is awesome. And I was so excited because I didn't know anyone else who was leaving Hillsong. And so hearing about that and then reading your book, I just got the book on Amazon and read it in probably a day or two, and realized that this is not an isolated experience. This is a shared experience. I've been through this stuff, but so many other people have. And I mean, we could all write many books on everything we've been through, but
absolutely.
And not one person is responsible. I think that's the other thing, right? Not one person is responsible for all the harm done. It's like a collective of, it's like the group think. And I think, when we realize, okay, that environment isn't healthy, I've got to find a better environment. That is a massive stepping stone. I don't know how to leave best, and I don't know how to look after yourself best. Like everyone's got their own recipe for that. And I think if there's one thing we should take, is that getting up on stage in front of a heap of people and telling them how to live doesn't work. I don't think it's ever worked. I don't think it's ever,
what do you mean work? Because it's effective. It definitely
it's great at controlling people. It's great at getting people swept up in the motivational kind of momentum stuff. It's all of that is fine if you're into marketing and branding. That's cool. But when it comes to happiness and contentment and great relationships, there is no one size fits all. Right? I think.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us the professional development story? Because I think that's a cool story.
It's true. So of course. In part of my job now, I think I counted last year. I probably was in 120 different events and lectures giving sort of presentations around what I do at university where I work. And so I'm always talking to people, which is kind of good. I get paid for that still, which is, a common theme. I'm sure my parents would be proud. But anyway, I went to this facilitation course and I walked in thinking, what is this person honestly going to teach me? I feel like I know all there is to know. So I sat down there like a big, inflated ego. And so I walk in, there's this music playing, a song that I knew, and it kind of made me happy. And so I sat down in the classroom and the facilitator asked us all, hey, if you came on public transport, put up your hand. And I put up my hand because I'd caught the train or whatever. And then he said, speak to the person next to you and tell them about what you do for a job. And then he stopped everyone and he said, in the first few minutes, I've taught you how to control a room full of people. Firstly, I controlled the atmosphere, the music and the way that the room was lit and all of this stuff was conducive to a positive sort of environment. Then when you sat down, I asked you to put up your hand and immediately you gave me control and authority over you because you did what I asked you to do. And then, when you spoke to the person next to you, you were following instructions so that I was reinforcing that control. And I just suddenly realized, I was like, mate, this is 101 how you get people to listen and trust you.
So easy. Yeah. When you look at it, it seems to be so easy.
Yeah. But it took me 30 something years to figure it out. Yeah.
Well, the older I get, the more you look at the enthusiasm of young people and it's just ripe for exploitation by people like this who want to build their own empire. And, you had a comparison, you had a family of comparison. Fantastic. You've got a wife that's going to support you and you guys can make decisions together. And that sounds like some of the major distinctions, because if you had none of those, where else do people turn but to the people on stage who are telling you how to live your life? Totally. Everybody wants help and community and some guidance. It's especially young people. This is all very reasonable, don't you think?
Yeah. I just don't know what it is, and I don't know why more people won't talk about their experience. I guess not everyone's an extrovert. I guess not everyone feels like talking is the answer.
You didn't want to talk for a long time, though, and you were quite hesitant and quite clear about that. And then things have changed, and
it's a good point.
You've also reached that 7-year mark, which seems to be some kind of magic number for people. 7 keeps coming up as a minimum. It really does.
I think I do sort of have a clue about that, and I think when I mentioned before, what scares me is doing the same thing I used to do, which was, read some text out of context in the Bible and interpret, quote unquote, what it means, and get up on stage and tell people, hey, give 10% of your income or give, or do this or do that because this is what's written in the Bible and God commands us to do. I feel very guilty about doing that. And I feel I just feel like if I were to ever tell people how to live or how to do anything in future, I'd better be right about it. But about a year ago, I think when also we started chatting, I reconnected with an old housemate of mine. So years ago when I was a youth pastor, he and I lived together in a group house, and he was, I guess you would say, backsliding. That's the word we used to use in church for when people stop going to church. And, it essentially just has all of these black sheep connotations. So this guy, I'm sure
no wonder you fell away. Like you were hanging out with backsliders.
Well, this is it. So Bonesy is his name. He's a very good friend now, and I know he's very happy to be talked about. But I felt very guilty about that relationship because I let him fall out of my life and I had better things to do, quote unquote, and so years later, I saw him pop up in an Instagram reel. He was talking about, I think it was a campaign that started in the States called Religion Shouldn't Hurt. And he'd made a video of himself talking about his experience, deciding for himself that he didn't want to be, religious anymore. And I saw that and I wrote to him and said, mate, that is so cool. I really loved hearing that. And I'm so sorry for the way I treated you when we used to live together and the way I sort of ignored our friendship. And he wrote back and just said, mate, let's talk, let's hang out. And so we reconnected, and it's so cool because we've hung out many times. And that made me feel a lot more like I could I don't know, talk a little bit more, because the guilt of pushing people out of my life up until that point, I still feel very guilty about it, and very rough about, just not wanting to be associated with backsliders sort of thing, and all of that, and the hypocrisy of that, I guess. And so now I just feel a lot more whatever. Like, we all have made mistakes, and I don't want to like reduce my mistakes to nothing, but I do sort of think, someone's just got to make the first move and apologize, right?
Right. I mean, well, you can't go back in time. So, I mean, stuff's been done, and there's thousands of people that have had bits and pieces of this culture, which is, you've described a dictatorship, and quite a brutal one. This is how you're going to live. We're going to forget everything. We're starting again at Bible college.
Well, yeah, if you really want to talk about that, I just remember some of the sermons that and let's be real, when you preach a sermon as a young pastor, you want to do a good job. You're on show, you're doing a performance, you know that everyone in the room is judging you. And so I would very much copy what I'd heard before and what resonated well with me. And so I remember, Pastor Brian at Hills, his sermons would be a lot like numbered lists of things to do. And an example might be, the offended person does A, B, and C, but the blessed person does D, E, F. And so it'd be all of these kind of step by step, how not to be a crap person, or how not to be a negative person, or how not to be a stingy person. And then, conversely, how to be generous and how to be blessed. And so I'd sort of think to myself, am I being like a negative person by thinking this, or am I not being generous? And so you'd always be critiquing yourself and kind of thinking, am I achieving this yardstick that's been held up for me? Yeah. So
watched a video yesterday on how that constant process of self-critiquing will only lead to misery and more self-consciousness, and therefore more misery and less happiness within yourself. So, okay, that's very interesting. There's definitely a certain style. I even do things in threes, because there's always like 3 examples of something given. What do we do with young people like you who, they're happy enough, they're doing okay? There's obviously something that there's a gap in our community this place is filling. Yeah. I wonder I don't know what you can offer young people apart from sport or that being part of something bigger than yourself.
Yes.
It's a huge pull. Let's go change the world together.
Yes.
I don't know how you replace that in
I
a
don't
community.
know. I take heart in that, a lot of the data coming out about Gen Z in terms of the way they consume information and the way they consume sort of products, is that Gen Z seems to be a lot more critical and suspicious of large institutions. And I love the sound of that. I love that Gen Z are a lot more interested in saving money and thinking about their future. And I think generationally, we would hope that there's a little bit more savvy going on and a bit more eyes wide open. I think when I myself was younger, the internet was just becoming a thing, and I think we only just got mobile phones or whatever, and we just were so vulnerable to, I guess, misinformation or sort of quasi information, and a place like a church that seemed so full of life and positivity, and it was, but anyone being able to just get up for 45 minutes and preach at you and tell you what was true and what was not is just such a thing that I don't think flies anymore, which I'm glad about.
Okay. Yeah. That's cool. And these Gen Zers aren't so mesmerized by Instagram and fast-moving images and special effects, I guess. If you've grown up with them, it's not as impressive, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, it's all changing so fast. If there's somebody out there that's like, yeah, Dave, I remember you made me cry too, can they reach out to you? Are you
Totally.
And you'd like to reach out, I guess, to some people around that you probably went home and maybe got a little teary on you. You would have suffered it as well, or you wouldn't know what to do.
I don't know.
Did you not get screamed at?
Many times.
As a friend of mine says, shout to the Lord, shout at the volunteers. Yeah, is that I'm not allowed there? You have to tell me. I don't know these things, right? So
I just don't care about. There are certain pastors that had a lot to do with my life. Some of them were incredible and are incredible people. Some of them are probably great people, but probably need to work on some anger management stuff and manipulation stuff, because honestly, I just sort of don't care anymore. I think, the offering message is honestly such a thing for me. It always stuck in my mind at church, and I'd listen to pastors get up and say, if you are faithful to God and if you bring the whole tithe to the storehouse, and he will open the windows of heaven and you'll be beyond blessed and all this stuff. And I looked at myself living as a single young person in Sydney, paying rent and going to church and having hardly any money to eat, and working at church and literally not having any money, to now where I have zero to do with church except for this conversation we're having right now. To be honest, I don't. And we are in a great position. We're super just surrounded by great people, great family. I live in a new city, Newcastle, which I've only lived in for a couple of years and already made some incredible friends here. I work in Sydney still, but I get to work remotely. I get to hang out with my partner all the time. We have a beautiful house. You know what I mean? I just sort of think everything that they told me would happen happened after I left.
Right.
Which is wild. So I'm like, you know what? Thank you.
I understand. I'm completely with you. And it sounds like you're not under that constant pressure all the time, unrelenting pressure to do more and to do better and for more people and more countries and the more planets.
Yeah. And I feel for my friends. I feel for a lot of my friends who are pastors and who have sort of become sort of absorbed into that world. And maybe what they're doing is rewarding for them and they love it. And on the other side, I think there's a lot of people who are sort of, like you say, a bit confused and don't know how to get themselves out of there. But I just think life is so short. And I think, just there are people out there who are going to support you and look after you. And you'll probably have to apologize and say sorry for the things that you've done and the ways that you were complicit, which I was. I absolutely agree that I was complicit. I got up and told people, give 10% of your money to the offering because that is biblical, which I don't believe it is, by the way. And
well, it's not.
It's not. And telling people, put up your hand and accept Jesus into your heart and you'll be saved. And, like causing all of these issues for people psychologically, that's what I did. I did it every single week. And that's the truth. And so I think a lot of people need to account for that and at the same time just do better.
That is fantastic. And you don't know, like, I can't tell you how much acknowledgement means to people. An apology means to people often much more in lawsuits than the remuneration. Like it's huge. And wow, that's just so strong of you. And yet simple. Like, I've done all kinds of things that I just don't even want to, right? Haven't we all got things at 3 a.m. that make us just want to disappear into the earth? But I'm sorry, what do you do? Do? You speak it, and I'm saying, hand yourselves in, boys, because, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. And then people can do the healing. Like, it's pretty straightforward.
Absolutely. It's got to be said as well. I don't think you'd ever say it on your own podcast, but I think you writing the book that you wrote, when you wrote it, because that was 2007 or something. Yeah. I remember being in church and hearing like, oh, this person Tany's written a book and it's terrible. And I was like, oh, okay. But that long ago, you sort of coming out with those ideas and stories has helped people like me break out of it. And psychologically, like I'd already left Hillsong, I was fine. But hearing that story and reading it and understanding that it wasn't just me and that it's not just us, it's actually all the people that have spoken to you on this awesome podcast and many other places. I think Janice in the States doing what she does and all the other
Janice.
people. It just like, sometimes I don't cry about it. I don't like sort of feel sad about it. I just think, thank goodness that people are finding each other and helping each other.
Yeah. And that was like, it was my big kind of message in the bottle thing, because, it was really like, what's your problem kind of thing. And it doesn't go away, that kind of like, there's something wrong and I can't be the only one. So that's fantastic. And I'm so grateful to you for chatting today. These are massive things. This is proper vulnerable stuff. There's nobody sitting next to you right now. There's no music playing. You're just talking to me and being really open. And I think it's going to have a really big impact on, this place has been dependent on isolation and censorship and shame of speaking. And it's so strong and it's so deep. And that's what we find out week after week. And, thank you so much.
Hey,
Really, really, thank you. I hope this sets off a chain of events of people connecting and chatting, because there's a lot of,
yeah,
the rumors that get spread when somebody leaves, the innuendos, the kind of
yeah,
there's a lot of broken relationships that need not be. So,
yeah.
yeah,
Agreed.
thank
And
you.
thank you again for having me. Thank you for all you
No,
do.
beautiful.
And for, if anything else, providing me with someone who I feel like is a mate, just chatting away every week on a Sunday when you put out the podcast. So I love it.
That was the whole idea. I mean, we're a funny little family and we're growing. And you don't have to talk about this, by the way, but I'm wondering how your marriage survived when others didn't, except that you're both on the same page, right? You guys had already, no, well, what happens seems to happen a lot of the time is someone has an issue or asks a question, and then there's a great divide and, pressure on people for loyalty, and there's relationships break down.
Mm.
And I mean, you would have also had to have said goodbye to a lot of
Yes.
mutual friends, separate
Yes.
friends, circles, contacts.
Absolutely. And a lot of it was heartbreaking. Yeah.
I don't know how you get through that. I just wondered if you had any tips.
Marry someone with abundant patience and absolutely just selflessness in bucket loads. I would say that is the answer.
Well,
I don't know.
mean, you're obviously very honest and vulnerable and willing to take the chance of the communications. Yeah, I mean,
we only live once, right? Like, you may as well find the people that accept you for who you are and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Guess who's turning 40. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough, Dave. This is truly, we just don't hear from many young married men who are able to articulate this. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. So much more to discuss. Have a beautiful public holiday, because
you too.
Queen lady. Okay.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye. See you soon.
He's a bit of a hero, this Dave, to me now. And I really, really, really hope he's the first of many people that can reach out to other people and go, hey, did you see what I saw? Did you think, can we talk? That kind of thing. There's so many people involved who have been subject to all kinds of misunderstandings and separations and isolations. And I just hope there's some really good connections that come out of conversations like these. Thank you so much for spending the time with us today. It's just wonderful that you've made it this far. And if you liked it, like it, subscribe it, share it with someone that you think could benefit from this. And follow us along, send us some messages, feedback, whatever you got on your mind. Got a lot of stuff coming up soon that you're going to love. So watch this space and stay tuned. And if you really want to support us, drop on by to the Leaving Hillsong Patreon or PayPal and say hi and sign up. It would really help. We've got a bonus episode tomorrow with Lindsay Duncan, an audience author, with his new fiction release, Becoming Ben, From God to Gay. So stick around. There's something to fill an hour on this long weekend. You know the rules. Keep being kind to each other. Be kind to yourselves and keep leaving Hillsong. And we'll talk soon. Bye.